So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third of our Fireside Talks for 2025. My name is Nick Wright. I'm the Ballycastle Museum Project Officer with Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council. This year's programme of Fireside Talks is part of a much wider project to restore, extend, and refurbish Ballycastle Museum with the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. All of the 2025 talks have showcased the amazing grassroots work that goes into recording and sharing our local heritage, and this evening's talk is no different. Many of you, especially those from Ballycastle, will be familiar with tonight's speaker. James McMichael grew up in Ballycastle and has always had a keen interest in the surrounding countryside, sketching and recording its history. Some years ago, he added photography to his skill set in order to record the beauty and history of our area and capture the disappearing buildings that we see around us. His photographic endeavours have resulted in 2 published photo books, focusing on Bonamargy Friary, and a record of Colonel Hugh Boyd's works down at the Margy. It was working on the Bonamargy volume which first sparked his interest in the local 18th century stonecutter, Alexander McDonnell, the subject of tonight's talk. Titled Wrought by Alexander McDonnell, Artisan of the Glens, this talk will explore the life and career of Alexander McDonnell, the skilled 18th century stonecutter whose work can be found across Ballycastle and the wider area, ranging from gravestones at Bonamargy and Old Ramoan to date stones for Castle Street, and of course the plaque at the Ballycastle Customs House. So with that introduction, I think, Jamie, thank you very much for agreeing to talk this evening, and over to yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to my Fireside Talk tonight, and thank you to Nick for hosting this talk, and thank you to all my family for being so helpful in helping me to complete this project. Now, how did I get interested in Alexander McDonnell? As Nick said, I was doing a book 15 years ago on Bonamargy, and I saw this old headstone, and it said on it, Wrought by Alexander McDonnell. It was only later in writings of Hugh A. Boyd that I saw that he was a stonecutter and had 2 other headstones up at Ramoan. And for 15 years, I've been working on this, but it's only in the past 6 months, really, that I was forced to get a move on when I was asked to do this talk. So thank you to my family, Aidan, Mal, Francis, everyone who helped me taking me around to see where these headstones are. So let's get started. I do have to tell you, unfortunately, there's very little known on a personal nature of Alexander McDonnell. It's just too far back, and there's a lot more work to do to try and find out who was he, what was his family, and everything. So let's have a look. Wrought by Alexander McDonnell. Now, I should say to begin with, where did Alexander McDonnell come from? Well, Sir Randall McDonnell, first Earl of Antrim, was commissioned by Queen Elizabeth I to do a building programme, and he was sort of made to build a castle at Glenarm, a castle at Ballycastle, a chapel at Bonamargy, the McDonnell Chapel, and other work, including the gatehouse at Dunluce Castle. So he apparently, and according to Hector McDonnell, brought in a team of Scottish stonemasons to do all this work. So they brought the Scottish influence with them. It was them who brought this very deeply cut, carved headstones with lots of memorial symbols on them. That's very much a Scottish influence. So I believe they came. Some of them stayed. This was in 1620s, 1630s. Some of them stayed on. They did a lot of work in the barony of Carey, including repair of churches, mostly Church of Ireland churches, right across the barony of Carey, which extended all the way to Coleraine and Dunluce. So I think Alexander McDonnell is descended from that line. Some of them stayed on, and his family are one of them. And what's next? Yes. His family stayed on, and I think there must have been 3 generations, because the dates of these headstones are too widely expanded. He couldn't possibly have done them all. So I think he had a father and himself and his son, extending from the earliest one, 1702, right through to 1790s. So there must have been maybe 3 generations, possibly all called Alexander McDonald, but the Alexander McDonald is the main one in the middle. And I think it was his father or his predecessor or his mentor who first got him started and taught him all these ways of working and his particular, very identifiable style. So let's move on. This is just the beauty of the area. This is Ballinagard. I'm going to talk about this later, because I think there's a certain amount of evidence that this is maybe where he worked, his workshop, or lived. And I will talk about that evidence shortly. But just the sheer beauty of this place and the isolation of it. And I'm going to explain why, just because it's isolated doesn't mean it couldn't really have been a possibility to be lugging heavy headstones about or transporting them. There's a map of the townlands of Colfeitrin. You can see Ballinagard there, right in the middle. It's quite a big townland just there compared to the other ones. I'm suggesting it as a location for where Alexander McDonnell worked. We have no conclusive proof of that, just some circumstantial evidence, which I'll go over later. So let's go to Bonamargy in Ballycastle. This is Bonamargy Priory 15 years ago when I was working there to do a book. Beautiful place. And just round to the right, the very far right, is Alexander McDonnell's own headstone, which he made himself. Let's have a look. That's it. You can see a very distinctive design. This is what he and his father came up with. There's always a semicircular coat of arms at the top, then an inscription plaque with usually a little winged cherub there, and always supporting decorated entablature on the side, and then this plaque at the bottom always has the same 3 symbols. This one's very worn, but you'll see them later in other headstones, and they're very well preserved. And if you look closely at the coat of arms, that's the McDonnell coat of arms. So he was very closely linked to the McDonalds of Glenarm. And that is amazingly well preserved compared to what it is today. If you saw that 15 years later, it's just horrendous. So it was well worth photographing that. And take a look at the figures. You'll see these later. I'm going to suggest later that these date back to the 1620s, 30s. The style, I mean, not the actual carving. The style is identical to a plaque that you will see later from 1630 at Glenarm Castle. Look at those figures. So if we move on, this is the McMichael headstone at Bonamargy. This is the family headstone belonging to ourselves. And this is there was 4 types of headstone that he really did. And this is called a tabletop flat one. And there's about 3 or 4 of these. They're slightly earlier. They're not too successful because they always get worn because of rain. And you can see the symbols and everything there. And this is called egg and dart design. And this is very indicative of Alexander McDonnell. He loved doing this, and he mostly always did it. And if we just have a look at the symbols, this is hugely Alexander McDonnell, a winged cherub with these amazing, it's very worn, of course, but you can see these are called swags, account sleeves, and all these memorial symbols there. Sand timer, upturned heart, and skull and crossbones. He was very close to nature, I think. He loved memorial symbols. He had a respect for the afterlife, much more than a lot of other headstone carvers. This winged cherub is obsessed with doing these because I don't, it's not doing, many people just ordered them. But anyway, not too successful as a headstone because they always got heavily worn with rain, as you can see there. So staying in Bonamargy, oh yes, these are close-ups of the sand timer and the upturned heart. These are quite rare to see on headstones. There's a few of them. I've never seen an upturned heart before, but it is a memorial symbol. And then if I move on, this is the Dara headstone in Bonamargy. Again, the big flat grey one. They used grey sandstone because we think it was stronger, because maybe people could stand on these and break them. So they're always grey, the flat ones. And you'll see different colours later. Ballycastle, of course, had all the different sandstones to use, and I'll talk about that later. But again, egg and dart around the side, and very, very unusual, almost contemporary looking kind of sculpture, an experimental type of thing. I've never been able to interpret what it is. So that's Dara. Move on. Oh yes, that's the Dara entablature. No idea what it is really. It looks like a shield of some kind. And then there's this very identifiable, very deeply cut work that's so indicative of Alexander McDonnell. And this is Mackay in Bonamargy. This is another type of headstone he did where the whole one side of the headstone is completely covered with a very deeply cut armorial kind of coat of arms in the middle, and all this heavy swags and acanthus leaves. This particular headstone goes down about another foot onto the ground. There's beautiful drapery that I've seen down below. Mackay, 1700s. I forgot to say, he worked mostly in the mid-1700s, and most of his work was for sort of well-to-do Church of Ireland people. So very few could really have afforded his work. But there is a smaller style that he did that was less expensive, and you'll see that later. Now, this is a small plaque with the McDonnell coat of arms in it. It's for McAllister of the Warren, and it's hidden in behind another headstone that you see there. But again, so identifiable as his work, deeply cut, but heavily worn. And this is the wall of the McDonnell Chapel. And the fact that this is set into the wall means that the McAllisters were very closely related to the McDonnells. Otherwise, they just wouldn't have done that. So moving on, this is the other type of headstone that we did, a smaller, more affordable headstone. And there you see the egg and dart, the winged cherub, and the little lines that he used to make the feathers there. Two symbols there. I have no idea what they are. They may be upturned hearts, but so far I haven't identified them. This is the kind of red sandstone that you get in Ballycastle along the coast. So there's just one of those in Bonamargy. and then move on. And here we are at Ramoan. Now, Ramoan is the centre of his life. He must have been Church of Ireland. That was his home, one of his home churches, because most of his work is up there. There's some amazing work up there, and we'll have a look at those now. This is a much older one. I believe this was by his predecessor or his mentor or his father who preceded him. Slightly different, but very old, and it's all there, isn't it? It just looks so like his work, and the date is a little earlier, and the wing chair looks a little different, but I think this is Alexander McDonnell's father or mentor's work. Move on. Again, according to the dates, I believe this is the predecessor of Alexander McDonnell, but look, it's so identifiable, heavily cut work. This frame, watch that frame there, because that you'll see that later occurring. That this is not a face, it's actually a coat of arms, and there's about another foot below the ground of different armorial symbols and swags, heavily worn, so you can't really tell what all this is, but it's early, but it's so in the McDonnell line of work. This is absolutely classic work by Alexander McDonnell at Ramoan. This is the gravestone of Alexander Lloyd of Castle Street, and it's in remarkable condition. And about 30 years before this, he did a commemorative date plaque for the house that Boyd built. John Boyd, sorry, it's the name John Boyd, that John Boyd built in Castle Street. And you will see that commemorative plaque in Clare Street car park. It's on the wall, and it's more or less identical to all this stuff, that it's sort of rectangular. So it's quite poignant. You know, he did the commemorative plaque for the house, and then he did John Boyd's headstone about 30 years later, and they're both very, very similar. Fantastic work. Look at all the heavily cut swags, the coat of arms of Boyd's, and it's in beautiful condition. Ramoan Old Churchyard. I've put this in. There's no dates on this or anything, but we've studied this, and myself and my brother believe this is the work of Alexander McDonnell, because we've compared these swags and this frame to the other work which you will see in Ramoan Old Churchyard. And this is very old, no date on it, but it's so like his work that we have included it in this talk. We don't know anything about this Reverend William Lind, apart from the fact that he was a Presbyterian minister and is buried up in the Church of Ireland Old Churchyard at Ramoan. Now, this is the classic design again, semicircular coat of arms, all this decoration at the top, and this lovely dental decoration here, and the inscription tablet. I believe there was a plaque down below, but it's missing. All these ones that you see up here at Ramoan Old Churchyard, most of these complex, big ones, classic of Alexander McDonnell, have at some point been moved at least once, possibly twice, because of the demolition and rebuilding of a couple of churches. St. Ecclesias at Ramoan Old Churchyard was demolished in 1812. So the headstones that may have been inside or on the wall were moved, and they're set into built walls for them. So they've definitely been moved once or twice. This one's got broken and damaged, but it's great to see them having survived all the same. And then the next one. This is something I uncovered myself. Don't think anyone would ever have seen this, but it's absolutely amazing work. Again, the winged cherub, all the flags, and this amazing, this rosette type thing. Yes, this was buried maybe 100 years or more. And just the next photo, that's it. It's John Hill of Alton, and there's all the incredible work. I had to cover it up again because that's the way I found it, but it's recorded now. Oh, go back. Yeah, that's it. Now, I sort of say that this is Alexander McDonnell's most amazing, incredible work. It's probably his magnum opus. Look at the incredible coat of arms. So this is the semicircular coat of arms as usual. The pineapples, the little urn up there. And there's the winged cherub and this fantastic dark design. And this is the only one that's in its own little mausoleum, which Alexander McDonnell also built. And you'll see why in a minute. And just look at, that's it, it's up at Ramoan. It's incredible. There's the plaque at the bottom with the three symbols. And there's the wall. This urn, we've yet to discover where this urn belongs to, whether it belongs to another headstone or this one, we still don't know. So just have a look at this incredible headstone. And down below, it says by A. MacD. There's the top of the wall, and you see the egg and dart. So we know that Alexander McDonnell did build this mausoleum. There's the plaque at the bottom, by A. MacD, by Alexander McDonnell. Now, we're very lucky to have two signed headstones. There's two of them, and they're both at Ramoan Old Churchyard, because it's very rare for a stone cutter to sign a stone like this, and it's even rarer for anyone else to do it. I only know of two, and they're both A. MacD, Alexander McDonnell. So we're so lucky to have that. And these are very well preserved. Now, on to this one, which is also at Ramoan. Again, it's absolutely classic design. These are built in sections. It's not one great big stone. I did forget to say that Alexander McDonnell's own headstone at Bonamargy was carved out of one solid piece of sandstone, whereas these are complex sections. They're all different sections installed together. And again, you can see that this stone has been moved. It was moved in 1812 when the old church was demolished. And it's probably moved again, maybe in 1848, when the old church, the new church, which was the old church, got demolished, and they moved to St. James's new church in 1848. So it's quite well preserved. It's totally covered in ivy, which I managed to clear to get the photograph. But this is incredibly important in the life of Alexander McDonnell, because if I move on, look at the beautiful signature cut by Alexander McDonnell. Probably the only headstone I know of that is signed. It's signed by the artist. And he probably was so proud of his work that he got permission of the family to sign it with such a prominent signature. It's almost like an artist signing their work. So if we move on. Now, this is inside St. James's Parish, Church of Ireland, up at Ramoan. And this was moved across from St. Ecclesias at Ramoan Old Churchyard in 1848. But probably was moved before that, because there have been 2 or 3 churches up there. Now, I'm showing this. I don't think it's by Alexander McDonnell. I'm showing it because you can see that the style is already there. Coat of arms, the architrave there, and the inscription plaque. So I think Alexander McDonnell's father, or predecessor or mentor, or whatever you would call him, is responsible for this. The material is totally different. It's marble, and the date is early 1727. So I'm only showing it to indicate the beginnings of this particular style of headstone that was developed by the McDonnells, and how Alexander McDonnell took it on further. So moving on. Yes, this is totally classic of Alexander McDonnell. This is another one that's inside St. James's at Ramoan and has been moved across. It's been moved a couple of times. Look how damaged it is. And the plaque at the bottom, which would have had the three symbols, is missing. But you see it's all there. Coat of arms, semicircular, this thing, the egg and dart, and the inscription plaque. So 1765, right on date for Alexander McDonnell. That is currently on the wall inside St. James's. That's the top of it. This would have been incredible when it was first cut. He was a very talented man, and sort of a shame that he's not, better known locally. So moving on. Now here we are in Ballycastle, Thailand. So let me get my evidence. Ballycastle, Thailand is an absolutely beautiful place. That little building is known as the Salt Box. The Salt Box is a building that's sort of it's shallower at the front and higher at the back, like a salt box shape. And I'm sort of suggesting that that might have been his workshop. I do have some evidence, with no conclusive proof, but absolutely gorgeous place. Let's look at it. There it is. We know that there was a mansion house here at one period. It was a coaching house on a very busy thoroughfare. It was almost like Spaghetti Junction up here with several roads crossing, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I want you to look on the wall. That is a commemorative plaque by Alexander McDonnell. What on earth is it doing up there? And we'll have a look at that now. This is one of the roads that came in. This road here is heading out towards Glens and the way out to Arnoy and the Braid Valley. That gave access to all the churches up in that area, including Clough and Kilrats and all those. You would think it would be very isolated up here, but it wasn't. They had roads going out in every direction, including the McDonnell Road, which was a road that led from Dunluce Castle right across to Glenarm. Remember, the coast road did not exist at that time, so this was a very important junction, and it was used by the McDonnells, including Sorry Boy McDonald, for getting across from Dunluce to Glenarm. And there's at least 4 roads that we know that cross here. So this was not an isolated place. This gave Alexander McDonnell access to all the Northampton. So moving on. Now this pillar, I would love to Alexander McDonnell to have made this. It's identical to the 2 pillars, or 4 pillars actually, at Bow Lane in Key Road. You may know those 2 old pillars at the bottom of the wee lane in Key Road. They're identical, and there's 2 at the top of that lane as well, but they're covered in ivy. And they're also identical to 2 pillars at Ramoan Old Graveyard, which are very old. So I would have loved for him to have been involved in these. It's just another little indicator to me that he may have lived and worked up here at Ballycastle. I should say that Ballinagard in Irish means townland of the artisans, and Cahal Galit references in 1981 as townland of the masons. It's just another little bit of evidence that I think there were stonemasons living here. Some of the descendants of the original Scottish crew that came in to do all the building work. So it's just one more piece of evidence. And then moving on, this is inside the salt box. I'm trying to imagine this as a workshop. It's incredibly old. We don't know, is it an outhouse or is it part of the mansion house that was up here? There were plans by one of the top McDonnells to build a castle at Ballinagard in the style of Glenarm Castle, but it fell through for some reason, so that never happened. But there was a mansion house and there was a coaching house, and this was a major stopping off point for coaches on their way along the coast. So what else? The plaque. Oh yes, now we come to the plaque. Like, why is there a plaque by Alexander McDonnell on this little building? Well, I believe that's because the McDonnells were up there and this was his area, his workshop, and he made this. It may have been on the original mansion house and was moved on to the little house. So moving on, it's incredible. Now look at the figure. We've seen that before on his own headstone, very indicative of his work, deeply cut. Look at the egg and dart. I think there was some writing along here. It's all completely worn. It would have said this house built by somebody with the date, but sadly it's quite worn. We can't get that. So moving on, I want to take you around some of these churches. Our Glens, you may know where that is. It's round the coast near Waterfoot. Absolutely beautiful location up on the hills above. See a very old church, which was a Catholic church. And there's one headstone I want you to see up here. It's for Shane O'Neill, who was probably a descendant of the Shane O'Neill. And this work that you see here, I believe, is by a son or the next person in line after Alexander McDonnell, because it's so similar, but yet different, not as deeply cut, and the date a wee bit later. So I'm suggesting there's another person working who was in the same line as Alexander McDonnell, but later, maybe a son, and possibly called Alexander too. That's one of his pieces. Now on to Armoy. Beautiful Armoy with the round tower and the Church of Ireland parish church. So if we go over behind the tower, oh no, in front of the tower, this is a little headstone. Again, the winged cherub that you see there, and a little bit of egg tart left. This is the little affordable piece that I talk about. It's very heavily worn, of course. There's just one up there. So somebody got a little headstone and took it up there. And moving on. There's 3 of these at Armoy. They're a bit of a mystery. They're all set into built walls. I'm looking at them and studying them, and I think these are possibly by Alexander McDonnell, because you see the inscription plaque there with these architraves above, but they never got decorated or enhanced in any way. And I think these 3, there's 3 of them, may have been left over in the workshops of Alexander McDonnell and got used as plaques here and have been later set into walls. But that's just a suggestion. I've no conclusive proof of that. So moving on, this is also at Armoy. Now I can assure you there is a classic headstone by Alexander McDonnell in there. It's completely covered in ivy. The circular coat of arms is up there. The plaque is down below with the three symbols. It's all there. Maybe later we'll get a better picture of it, but it is so absolutely classic of his work. 1786, just spot on for the end of his career. Amazing. And so moving on to Ballintoy. This is beautiful Ballintoy Parish Church. And there on the wall you see a typical headstone by Alexander McDonnell. Just have a closer look at that. There's the winged cherub up there, the inscription plaque, architrave, and all this. It's very heavily worn. Now, I believe this is a bit of a mishmash. This was never the original plaque. I believe the semicircular plaque would have been there with coat of arms. This here is probably from the castle that was nearby in Ballintoy, and it's the church's coat of arms. But I think the semicircular coat of arms was probably broken whenever they moved this. This was probably inside the church, the old church, and when the church was rebuilt in the 1820s, I think, it probably got broken and they put it together with a different plaque. This is not Alexander McDonnell. I actually think this is the son of Alexander McDonnell, and they put them together as a bit of a mishmash. But that's on the wall of the church at Ballintoy. Ballymoney. You wouldn't believe there's one in Ballymoney, but they took two all the way. This is Ballymoney, old churchyard. This church is one of the churches that Sir Randall McDonnell, first Earl of Antrim, built or repaired at least, but we think he built it, had it built. Beautiful old tower. And just down there, down below it, there somewhere, is one of Alexander McDonnell's small headstones. That church there is the new church, built in the late 1700s. So that's the old church, and that's the newer one. And there's a road in between. So if we move on, this is in the newer section, and that's an amazing headstone by Alexander McDonnell. My brother discovered that totally by accident one day. And there's the coat of arms. We'll have a look at that. So typical of his work. Heavily worn, of course. Coat of arms in the middle. All this heavily cut canthus leaves and the frame. Note the frame, sorry. Note the frame. Yeah, you'll see that again elsewhere. Up above, can't see it really, but there's a little winged cherub carved on the side, up on the edge there. And we know that there's a little skull carved down at the bottom end. I've never seen those before. So moving on. Oh, I should say that this headstone is in the newer section at Ballymoney. If you know the setup at Ballymoney, there's two sections, the old one and the new one, with a road in between. There was a bit of controversy when that road was built in the 1840s. They put it through. They didn't want it, but Charles Mannion forced it through. Anyway, so there's an older section and a newer section. This old headstone is in the newer section, so there's an explanation for that. Whenever the road was put through in the 1840s, it reinterred some of the headstones into the newer section. So although this is 1700s, it was moved in the 1840s, so it's ended up in the newer section. This is also at Ballymoney in the old section, a classic little headstone by Alexander McDonnell, winged cherub, egg and dart, and they're very heavily worn, 1700s. So just the two headstones in Bonamargy. Billy Church out near Bushmills. That's it, lovely church. This is another one, absolutely classic wing cherub, egg and dart, circular top. It's the more affordable work by Alexander McDonnell. Not everyone can afford those amazing pieces that he did for the big wings. So moving on. This is another work at Billy. Wing cherub, egg and dart, all lovely, heavily worn, 1700s. It's identical to another headstone in Coleraine in St. Patrick's Parish Church there in the main street. And they're both Mackay. So there's a bit of a story to those. I'll have to find out later. Now these are, I'll put these in. I don't think these are by Alexander McDonnell. These are by someone who came next, possibly a son. They're very like his work, but yet different. They're not as sort of organic, smooth, deeply cut, but yet very, very similar. Everything the same. The cutting of the acanthus leaves the same, the coats of arms. So I think the same line, but later. The date is later. So possibly a son. Now, Coleraine, there's just one in Coleraine so far. That's it. It's identical to the one in Billy, and it's also for Mackay. And it's set back against the wall, so it's not the original location of it. But you see the wing cherub, egg and dart, everything just perfect. How they got that to Coleraine, never know. Cushion down. Now, the reason I'm showing this is because I don't think it's not by Alexander McDonnell. Again, I think it's the son. It's later, 1816. And you can see the figure, all the same sorts of carving, and yet different, not as deep, not as recognizable. So I think there was a son working for a short time after his father, Alexander McDonnell, and there's just one of these that I know about. So it was possibly just a short time that he worked. That's Cushendall. Or is it Cushendall? I'm not sure. Derry Keehan. Derry Keehan's out. It's out not far from Coleraine, not far from Derby. That's Derry Keehan Church, lovely old ruined church. And some interesting headstones. This is another work by what I'm calling the son, identical to what we saw before by that person. So I think that he's in the same line as the McDonnell stonemasons, but just a little later, and the work is identical. You see it there. This is William Dunlop, died 1798. What does that mean? He was one of the ringleaders of the 98 rebellion, and he was hanged at Coleraine Church, and he was buried in the street. And some of his aunts, his family, dug him up in the middle of the night and reinterred him into Derry Keehan Church, and later they got a headstone made for him. That's another one beside it, also Dunlop, a little earlier, and I think again by the son, almost identical. And I think he was brought in to do the previous one, William Dunlop, because he had done this one for a relative, Dunlop, about 10 years earlier. And also at Derry Keehan is this little classic yellow sandstone wing cherub, egg and dart design headstone by Alexander McDonnell. And then we move on at Derrykeehan to this amazing headstone. It's built into the wall of a mausoleum. Now look carefully at this headstone, because you're going to see later near enough identical sorts of headstones at Lade Old Churchyard near Cushendall. So let's look at the plaque there. Identical to all the work by the McDonnells, the figure with sort of nappy on, and this work, when they do the canthus leaves, you can easily recognize it. And the egg and dart design, of course. Oh, now, this is another one at Derrykeehan. Again, very similar. It's covered in a green mold, but you see the work. It's just so indicative of what I call the sun. It's not Alexander McDonnell. The date is slightly too late and slightly different, but definitely the work of this other person, who I believe was the son of Alexander McDonnell. And just moving on, this is inside Derrykeehan Church, an old plaque on the wall, which is completely heavily eroded. But you can see there the organic work of Alexander McDonnell, deeply cut, coat of arms in the middle, and this frame that I talk about round it, it's heavily eroded, and there's about another 1.5 feet below with memorial symbols on it. So nobody knows what this means or what's on this little plaque here. We do have a story connected to that. In the 1800s, they wanted to move Derrykeehan Parish Church to Derby, but most of the congregation were against it. So one night, somebody put a barrel of gunpowder in and blew up part of the church, which was the last straw really, because they did end up moving the church to Derby. So I'm wondering, did this even get damaged in that explosion? Because you can see how black it is. Just be interesting to know, was that damaged in the gunpowder plot, which resulted in getting the church moved to Derby? But this is absolutely classic of Alexander McDonnell. Donaghey Clough Church, which is up near, where is it, up near Ballymena? That's Clough Church, beautiful old church. We believe it may be one of the churches built by Sir Randall McDonnell, or at least repaired by him. So it's very old. I'm just looking at the headstones. This headstone is lying on the path beside the church. This is absolutely Alexander McDonnell. Look at the work, wing cherub, coat of arms, canthus leaves. It's amazing. It's heavily worn, and it's just lying there, 1765. So they managed to get that up by horse and cart, a long way to Clough. And then moving on. This is an absolutely amazing classic work by Alexander McDonnell up at Clough Church. See, everything's right. Semicircular coat of arms up there. Inscription plaque. The plaque with 3 symbols on it. It's identical in design. And just look at the coat of arms. Amazing work. And the very heavily worn winged cherub there, which he was sort of obsessed with. And still on that, there's the plaque. It's very well preserved, actually. You can see that this is some sort of saint or figure here. Crossbones and a bell. Memorial symbols. Always the same. Now, my brother spotted this in, it's built into the west wall of the Clough Church, heavily worn, but you can just see the coat of arms there. And it's so Alexander McDonnell. There's the egg and dart design. This has been moved, of course, pretty sure of it. It must have been inside at one point, or inside an older church, because it's very, very heavily worn. This is another one in the west wall. It's hidden in behind another headstone of the same family. But you can just see everything's right. There's the winged cherub and all this work that he did. It's incredible. So it was so incredible I used that at the front of my book that's coming up in the talk, of course. And just moving on to Glenarm. You wouldn't believe that there's a classic work by Alexander McDonnell. How they got it to Glenarm, I don't know. But this is Glenarm Parish Church. It's on the site of an old friary. There's the classic work at Glenarm, identical semicircular coat of arms, winged cherub, plaque at the bottom with the three symbols. We searched and searched. Sadly, this is not signed. It's for Clark. They must have been very wealthy to be able to afford these types of headstones. It's also probably been moved because it's in a built little section of wall that may have been inside the earlier church. So there are 10 of these known, 10 of this particular design. 4 of them are at Ramoan. That's close up of the coat of arms. They're quite well preserved and amazing. Covered in ivy. Sadly not signed. Now I'm showing you this. This is a plaque on the Barbican at Glenarm Castle, 1630s. Incredibly well preserved. But you can see the style, it's all there. That's where it came from. This is the original Scottish stonemasons who did this in the 1630s. I think the reason it's so well preserved is the castle was built in the 1630s but was burnt down in the 1641 rebellion. So we think this was held inside somewhere for years and years before it was put back in the Barbican sometime in the 1700s. So I think that's why it's quite well preserved. But you see all the work. It's already close to Alexander McDonnell, and why I think he is a descendant of these people, inherited these styles and ways of working. So that's at Glenarm Castle. Glens is a wee church around near Larne. And we just look at that. There's the church. There's just one little headstone that we're still looking at, but we believe it to be by Alexander McDonnell. And there you see the typical deeply cut swags, and in the middle appears to be a skull with a sand timer. So that requires further work, but we're pretty sure about that. So that's a long way away. It's one of the longest, furthest away headstones from Ballycastle. Wrought churchyard. We're looking at this work too. We're not sure yet. It's set into the wall of an old part of the church, but it's heavily worn. But just be interesting to know if it was one of his pieces. There's the winged cherub. Now here we come to Lade. Lade Old Churchyard is near Cushendall. Beautiful place. Look how beautiful it is. There's a little path down to it. And we're looking at these. Remember I said that they're Keehan? Almost identical type of headstone. So the same person has made these. These are slightly later If you look at them and think, oh, these must be ancient, but they're not. They're slightly younger than Alexander McDonnell's works. So early 1800s, but identical work. I think it's his son who's done these. A lot of the McDonnells are buried here. So if we look closer at that, there they are. The work of what I believe the son of Alexander McDonnell. And that is not as deeply cut. If you look at that, you think that must be ancient, but it's actually younger than Alexander McDonnell's work. It's maybe his son, I'm pretty sure it's his son. So moving on, there's another flat stone there, and the flat stones are always grey, you may notice, because they used the grey sandstone for the flat ones, because it was stronger. But you see the work there, heavily worn, there's the coat of arms. Another McDonnell, and again a work which I believe the son of Alexander McDonnell. And just finishing on this that laid, it's the only one that laid, I'm pretty sure, is absolutely by Alexander McDonnell. There's the winged cherub, heavily worn. It's John Thompson, and you can see the remains of the egg and dart design. Egg and dart is an architectural feature around the edge, and you can see the beautiful, incredibly beautiful setting of that headstone under the old yew tree, or the old sycamore tree. Rathlin. Wouldn't believe there's one on Rathlin, would you? But there it is. It's inside St. Thomas's, Church of Ireland. And again, absolutely classic. How they got that over, I'll never know. But it's in sections, so they could have got it over. There's the winged cherub. Inscription plaque and the symbols slightly differently arranged at the bottom. So that's over in Rathlin. So we know that they were capable of getting works to other places. I should say at this stage that we know of a possible work by Alexander McDonnell on the island of Islay, and we're looking into that at the minute because we need better photographs. But we know they're capable of transporting these things across the sea. So it'd be quite nice if there was one on Islay. And I think we should talk just at the minute on the materials used. Just get that up here. Materials. Yes, we used about 4 or 5 different colors of Ballycastle sandstone: grey, white, yellow, red. These were all easily available around the coast, and even from Pan's Rocks itself and Cape Rock, there are signs of quarrying. So my brother did find an advert in the newsletter of 1700s. It was from a John Brown quarry owner extolling the virtues of Ballycastle sandstone. And it talks about the different colours: grey, red, yellow, white, and the strength and how great it is for headstones and lintels. The quarry owner, James Brown, was just extolling the virtues of it and how you could have everything cut, pre-cut and delivered. The shapes and sizes and the blocks were called scantlings. That refers to any sizes of wood or stone that you get cut. And for example, in Bonamargy, you will see blocks of headstones that are just straight from the quarry, ready to go with inscriptions on, not worked in any way. So they were quite good at preparing the stone for the stone cutter. And yeah, that advert was from the 1700s. It was so interesting to find that. So those were the materials. They were easily available from around the coast in Ballycastle. So moving on now to what I call the plaques, which are the date stones, commemorative stones that Alexander McDonnell did. Let's have a look. This is probably his most famous work. Everybody from Ballycastle would probably recognize this. This was originally on the customs house at the quay, and which stood facing where the bowling green is. So this was facing the bowling green originally, and this is for the King George II at the time. So Alexander McDonnell cut this. It's the only one that's highly painted. I'm not sure if I like it, rather have an original. So this is a photograph I took in 2010. And this one is 2018. And this is the current state of that plaque. It's lying in a store ready to be rescued. So this is probably the best known work by Alexander McDonnell. It's nice to know that it's still around, and it's had quite a checkered history because it's been moved about 5 times, and it was involved in a bombing of the Marine Hotel in the 1970s and was rescued at the last moment before the hotel was demolished by Anthony McKinley and a team of local volunteers. So thanks to them, it still exists and is ready to be sort of repaired maybe and held in the museum. So just moving on. This is another plaque built for a house in Castle Street, Kearney's Chip Shop, and it's out the back. These plaques were originally on the front of the building. They were built, or they were made to commemorate the building of the building. So they were always on the front, but over time, as buildings got fixed up and rendered, they were usually moved to the rear of the building. So this one is in very good order, quite well preserved, 1739. So we know that Kearney's Chip Shop was built in 1739. Lovely design on the little cherub's face there. That is currently sitting up in their living room. Sorry for the quality of the photo here, but that is John Boyd's plaque for a house in Castle Street. We saw his headstone earlier. That's near enough identical with the Boyd coat of arms and all the swags around it. That is currently in an outhouse to the rear of the building, which is sort of halfway up Castle Street on the south side, the left side going up. Incredibly well preserved. So moving on, this is the famous one that everyone should recognize. It's in Clare Street Car Park. It was originally on the front of the Glens bar. This house was built by Charles Gray, 1740. So it got moved to the rear of the building, and it's currently in a sort of a wall at the back. It's incredibly well preserved, I think, considering it's in such a vulnerable position. So just moving on, this is actually Charles Gray's headstone up at Ramoan Old Churchyard, and I believe that Alexander McDonnell made this, although it's not highly decorated, but it's just so his design with the inscription plaque and that architrave thing there. So I think he made that, but it never really got decorated, which is maybe the family didn't want it highly decorated. So just moving on, close. Have we closed? So other graveyards and churchyards visited. That is a list of what we've done. There may be more headstones that we don't know. There's more work to do on this, and hopefully there'll be more stuff turning up. I myself would love to come across a piece by Alexander McDonnell that is not a plaque or headstone, such as a bust or something like that, just to see his personal work, because you only ever see his job work. Interesting to know, did he do sort of more artistic stuff like busts and things? So those are the churches visited so far. This is the map showing the churches visited. The red ones are where his headstones are, his work, and you can see the spread out. So it spreads out from what I believe was his workshop at Ballycastle, and it spread out that far really. We found nothing beyond that. There's possibly one on Isla when we're looking into that, but this is as far as his work gets. We haven't found anything as far as this yet. We've checked Portrush, Portstewart, Coleraine. There's one in Coleraine, one in Ballantoy, a couple in Ballymoney, Ardclinus, of course, and as far as Glenarm, but nothing up this far just yet. But there's more work to do on that. This is a closer up view of the spread of his work. You can see it's mostly centered around Ballycastle, and then there's a few spread out to Billy, Keehan, Garats, and Lade. Further one at Clough. It's not bad spread. So what do we learn? One of the things we notice is that Francis Joseph Baker, who did a lot of historical work, late 1800s, 1900, studied all these headstones and everything, but never linked all these works before. I think this is the first time that anyone has sort of linked all the works of Alexander McDonnell and kind of publicized that this amazing sculptor was working in the 1700s in the Ballycastle area. So, yeah, several generations of McDonnell carvers, possibly father, son, and grandson. It's the only explanation to cover all the dates involved. We've talked about the 4 different types of headstones, to the very complex, amazing one, which would have been very expensive, to the small, little, yellow headstone with the winged cherub, which was more affordable. Most of his work was for wealthier types of families, mostly Church of Ireland. And we know that the stone was sourced at local quarries from local stonemasons. Yeah, several types of local sandstone were involved, different colors. And of course, the amazing fact that 2 of the headstones are signed. People keep saying, oh, why are only 2 signed? But we're lucky to have any, because it was not usual for any person to sign a headstone in the 1700s. So we're lucky to have those. Yeah, we've talked about the Scottish influence and the Gaelic influence, and that's why they're so recognizable and so identifiable, that heavily deep cut way, organic way that the work almost comes out of the stone. It's unlike other people's work. Yeah, time has shown that they are long-lasting and robust. Some of them are very heavily worn, but we're lucky to have what we have because it's such a long time ago. It's amazing that they've lasted. I should say at this point that we know there are at least 3 others still to be found at Ramoan Old Churchyard. We're still looking for those. It's quite exciting because we have found one that needs a lot of work to get it uncovered, and there'll be more on that later. Yes, I should say that the earliest work in this line is 1702, and I believe that was the beginning of it. The father who taught his son, Alexander McDonnell, and most of his work is spread through the mid-1700s to sort of around 1790s. And I think his career ended around then, and maybe his son took over and did that further work that I showed you earlier. Style was organic, carved in deep relief, and he was very close to the spiritual end of things and the afterlife with his inclusion of so many memorial symbols. And we've talked about the Scottish influence. It's important to remember that those Scottish stonemasons were imported into Northampton to do the work for Sir Randall McDonnell, and I believe quite a few of them stayed on and gave rise to the Alexander McDonnell line of stonemasons who followed in their footsteps and did all his amazing work, which hasn't really been recognized. But there's this stone cutter in Ballycastle area and all the incredible work that he produced. He really was an artist, not just a stonemason. Now they are at risk. They're breaking up and decaying. You may have noticed that Alexander McDonnell's own headstone at Bonamargy is smashed. It was smashed by another big stone that was thrown at it sometime around 2009, I think. There are photographs of it intact, and the photograph I showed you was done in Photoshop as a reconstruction of what it should look like. Sadly, it's in 2 bits lying on the ground, and those are deteriorating very rapidly. So that's a bit sad. Next steps. Yeah. To complete our current body of photographs, get them onto documents. There is more exciting news coming because we've uncovered more stuff at Ramoan, but it's not complete yet, and we're to do that. And we're in contact with the Islay Museum to see exactly what that is over on Islay, because we believe, and I believe, that it is a work by him, but we just need more information. It'd just be nice if we knew that one had made its way to Islay. We've work to do on the customs house plaque. It's currently lying in a safe place, but we're looking into how we can get it to an even safer place and keep it ready for wherever it is going to be housed, possibly in the museum. And while this talk tonight is helping to raise awareness of these unique and beautiful works and to help prevent any more of their loss. Oh yes, my book will be out soon, which is a complete photographic record of everything we've found so far, with the photographs and the names of the people who are on the headstones. So that will be coming out before Easter, and a copy of it will be available at the library to read. It's not an actual published book. I only ever get 2 or 3 copies because they're very expensive. I usually keep one, put one in the library, possibly the museum or Korean library too. So just moving on. There's information there that you can note if you wish and look these things up, just more information. Give you a moment just to write that down. And moving on. That is very much it. And thank you for listening. Is there anything more in? Cut by Alexander McDonnell. That is beautiful. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you to Nick for hosting this talk tonight. And thank you to all my family for helping me so much, taking me around all these graveyards. We spent many a lovely day or wet days floundering about in gravestones looking for these things. So hopefully there's more to come. So I'll say good night and thank you for listening.
Didn't realize I was still muted there. Jamie, thank you so much for that really interesting and absolutely beautifully illustrated talk. The photography there was brilliant. Quite a few of those carvings certainly were very familiar, but I never for a moment, I think, considered that we would know the name of the stonecutter, let alone the fact that so many of them would be from the same person. So really fascinating. Do you want to stop sharing for a moment and we'll just see if there's any questions in the room? Oh, we have a couple of comments in the chat. Thank you for those for the interesting talk and the beautiful photographs. Excellent talk. Thanks, James. Thank you so much for an interesting program. So all very positive. Are there any questions in the room? Yeah, Donald.
Yeah, got to just say, James, I'm just hugely impressed. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. I just had absolutely no idea that that existed, you know.
Yes.
Around.
Yeah. No, I'm chuffed with it because it is a sort of a new development. Nobody is quite aware of this, so I'm chuffed with it.
Well, I'll be in Friars Bush Cemetery tomorrow, and I'll certainly open my eyes a lot wider.
It'd be worth it. It'd be worth it. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if there's one up there.
Well,
Hopefully,
I mean, if I can draw your attention to one, I'll be delighted. You know.
Absolutely, thank you. We did mention it.
Is it? You probably are referring to about 3 Alexander McDonnells. Is it possible or even probable that their work may have overlapped?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. The unfortunate thing is that Alexander McDonnell is a very common name back then. They were all over the place, so it's very hard to work out who's who. But the other unfortunate thing is there's absolutely nothing known of a personal nature about Alexander McDonnell. And the idea I put forward for Ballycastle is circumstantial evidence only, but there's a lot more work to do on that. I did forget to say in the chat that there are references of Alexander McDonnell's being leaseholders at Ballycastle. So we know they were there, and it's definitely leaseholders slightly later in the early 1800s. That's just another further little bit of evidence. There's a lot more work to do here on this.
Thank you very much.
Marino, you've got your hand raised there.
Yeah, it's just a simple bit of curiosity. It was maybe slightly touched upon there by the last speaker. How can you be sure? You've obviously looked at probably hundreds of stones. How can you be sure that some of those haven't been done by a contemporary using a sort of a template or a similar style to?
Oh, copying, sort of copying.
Yes, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, it's the same idea as paintings. If a Monet turns up and it's not signed, experts will just look at that and know it's Monet. They can tell just from years of looking at these. You get a feel for it and you know if it's right or it's not right. So it's the same thing. Just because they're not signed doesn't mean it's not by that artist. It's a similar type of thing. It's just a feeling. You can never absolutely prove anything. You're just putting it forward as your theories. So it's just down to experience, really.
Yeah, just a wee quick follow-up on that. Have you come across any paper trail? You know, are there any sales invoices or whatever they would have used?
No,
No.
I didn't have time to do that. We do know there's a huge collection of the Boyd stuff at Crony. So we're going to look at all that, and hopefully there will be a piece of paper ordering something. The only thing about that is I'm aware that Colonel Hugh Boyd didn't seem to have much to do with Alexander McDonnell. He didn't work on the Diamond Church, I don't think. I think Alexander McDonnell was just too busy doing his own work to get involved in any of the stuff that Colonel Hugh Boyd was doing, like building the Diamond Church or Hybla House, which he had renovated. I would love to see some work by Alexander McDonnell at Hybla House, for example, but I just can't prove any of it. It's just not, there's nothing there that you could say, oh, that's Alexander McDonnell. So I don't think he did much for Colonel Hugh Boyd. I think he was just too busy doing his own stuff, although they were totally contemporaries.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a question in the chat there. Is the Bonamargy book available for purchase?
Technically, yes. You can go on to blurb.com and get it. I never really produced it with a mind to selling. It was always to be a reference book to put in libraries and things, but you can buy it there. Blurb.com. Blurb Bonamargy, James McMichael. If you search that, you get it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Last orders? No. Yes, Trudy, if you drop me an email, sorry, there's a question in the chat there from Trudy asking for the web address. If you drop me an email, I'll be able to send you a link. So that might be the easiest way of doing it. Look, folks, thank you very much for joining us again this evening. Thank you, James. That was brilliant. Next week, we'll be joined by the Friends of Ballycastle Museum. It'll be another joint presentation like we had from Rathlin to begin with. And it will be exploring some of Ballycastle Museum's best known and some of its much more hidden treasures. So thank you very much again this evening.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Good night.